In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and video media online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using 3 simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, it's the beginning of a brand new week. A lot going on this week. I want to get into Afghanistan a year later. We just passed the 1-year anniversary of our withdrawal from America's longest war. I'll tell you about that in a moment. Valerie Plame is going to be with us at the top of the second hour, a former CIA officer. I want to ask what her thoughts are on how Trump could have used the classified information that he stole. Newsweek was reporting over the weekend that it was possible that some of the information that Trump had stolen, that he had done at Mar-a-Lago, was included payroll information on spies. And if that was the case, I was speculating on Twitter, this is the sort of thing that you would think that, the Russians or the Saudis or maybe even the Chinese would be willing to pay billions for. Was there a bidding war that Jared won or that Saudi Arabia won and the payoff was $2 billion to the Trump family via Jared? Or God only knows how much money got given to Donald and it just got put in a Panamanian account that we know nothing about. We'll get into that in the second hour. Also, has treasonous Trump declared war on America with his MAGA followers? We'll get into that in the second hour. In our third hour, Dr. Justin Frank, the psychiatrist, is going to drop by. How will Trump behave if he's indicted? And what, in all probability, will his cult followers do? And also, geeky science. Can a bowl of grapes save your life? By the way, just an FYI, I think I mentioned last week, I have back surgery on Thursday of this week. Jefferson is going to fill in for me on Thursday and Friday and maybe Monday of next week. It's small surgery. It's a laparoscopic little thing, taking out part of a disc. But I've got an appointment this morning that I couldn't get around that starts in about 7 minutes, where the hospital is going to call me and I got to do a little song and dance on the phone. And so we will play a little bit of best of material for 5 or 10 minutes or thereabouts until I get off the phone with the doctor's office. I'm sorry, I just couldn't. It was one of those things I couldn't reschedule. So, other than that little interruption, it's you and me and Valerie, Plame, and Justin Frank all day. I want to start out with my op-ed today from HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Afghanistan a Year Later. Can we finally speak honestly about Bush and Cheney's little war? The fact of the matter is that the media has been reporting, particularly over the weekend, Fareed Zakaria did a whole hour-long special on it, in fact, on his program GPS on Sunday, that basically we had to invade Afghanistan because the Taliban wouldn't give us bin Laden. It turns out that that's not true at all. The Taliban repeatedly tried to give us bin Laden. This was reported in the Washington Post just 3 days after 9/11, or 4 days after 9/11 on September 15th. The Taliban was begging to give us bin Laden, in fact. I mean, they didn't want to be bombed back to the Stone Age. They were already in the Stone Age. It was the second poorest country in the world behind Burkina Faso. So why did Bush and Cheney decide to attack Afghanistan? Well, you've got to consider, number one, at the time that this happened, their popularity ratings, their approval ratings were in the tank. They were in the neighborhood of 50% because Americans still thought that, Bush lost the election by 500,000 votes. And the word was leaking out. This BBC special that had been done that showed that George W. Bush's brother, Jeb, the governor of Florida, had knocked 90,000 African Americans off the voting rolls, was the only reason that George W. Bush was in the White House, combined with the Supreme Court stopping the recount down in Florida that the Florida Supreme Court had ordered. So much for the 10th Amendment, right? So, number one, they needed a distraction. Number two, they were already planning to have a war against Iraq. That had been planned since 1998 by the Project for a New American Century that Jeb Bush had signed on to. George W. Bush told his biographer, Mickey Herskowitz, in 1999, the year that he was preparing to run for president, Mickey Herskowitz wrote the first draft of A Charge to Keep, Bush's so-called autobiography. He told him, if my father had all his political capital built up when he invaded Iraq and he blew it. If I become president, if I have a chance to invade Iraq, I'm not going to have a short war. I'm going to have a long war, and I'm going to get everything done. In other words, it was all for his reelection. They were planning in 2003 to invade Iraq just in time for the 2004 election, because Bush knew that wartime presidents are more likely to get reelected. There's a long history of this. It goes back to FDR. It goes back to Abraham Lincoln. It's not a secret. And so adding the Afghanistan war to it was just gravy. But the fact of the matter is Afghanistan had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. It was not planned in Afghanistan. It was planned in Germany and in Jupiter, Florida. It was not, the closest that any of it came to it was that bin Laden wrote the check and he was living in Afghanistan. But people say, well, but bin Laden had terrorist training camps. Yes, he did. But none of the hijackers went through those training camps. The training camps were basically just a little PR and fundraising thing that bin Laden was running, and maybe 5,000 people had been through them. They were like the ones that militias run here in the United States, where these guys go out and just, run around in the woods pretending that they're soldiers. So, what did Afghanistan have to do with 9/11? Literally nothing. So why did we attack Afghanistan? Because Bush and Cheney thought it would help them politically. They thought it would raise the chances of them getting reelected. It would raise their approval ratings. And by the way, they were right. It did. It worked out that way. The other question, so number one, why do we continue this myth that Afghanistan was refusing to turn over bin Laden? Well, because the Republican Party has been pushing it since 2002. The news media keeps coming out and saying it's not true, it's a lie, but every time a Republican gets in front of a camera, that's what they'll say. I saw this over the weekend twice. But it simply was not true. Afghanistan was begging to give us, or give a third country, bin Laden. So, number one, that was a lie. Number two, we say, well, we had a war for 20 years. We didn't have a war for 20 years. We had a war for 3 weeks. It took us 3 weeks to take down the government in Kabul. That was it. The war was over. Then began a 20-year occupation, just like in Vietnam. We secured the government of South Vietnam in a matter of months. But then, it was like, how do you occupy a country where the people really don't want you there? And, that was the great challenge. That was the how do we figure this one out? Right? And so here we are. And by the way, this war was never declared. The Constitution clearly says Congress has to declare a war. I realize there was an authorization to use military force, but the AUMF did not meet the constitutional requirement that Congress declare wars. It's right there in Article 1, Section 8. Only Congress has the power to declare a war. And the last time Congress declared a war was World War II. We've had a bunch of these things. Vietnam, Korea, Bosnia, Afghanistan, Iraq, none of them were declared wars. We need to reckon with this. It's time for us to have an honest accounting of our own history, to own up to the fact, and it is a fact, to own up to the fact that Afghanistan represented no threat to us. This was a country that had a GDP of $2 billion a year. The average income in Afghanistan was $2 a day. We could have gone into Afghanistan and said, here's $10 billion. We'll make the whole country 5 times as rich as it is, and you give us bin Laden. They would have put him on a float and run a parade to deliver him to us. But instead, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney wanted to have a war. They thought that a war would be a useful thing for them. They thought that a war would get them, good headlines. It would get the, wars cause a rally around the flag effect. This is a reality that is not lost on these guys. They understand how it works. They know exactly how it works. And thus, here we are. Here we are with a lie. The whole Afghanistan war was a lie. And not only that, it was a lie that made contractors trillions of dollars, or at least hundreds of billions of dollars, including contractors, the Carlyle Group. Who was the CEO of the Carlyle Group for a while? Poppy Bush. Who ran Halliburton? Dick Cheney. In fact, it was on the verge of bankruptcy before the Afghan war. The Afghan war saved Dick Cheney's bacon. You got, Betsy DeVos's brother was running Blackwater. They got rich too. Everybody, it was an orgy of getting rich. And then that leads us finally to the question of why did bin Laden attack America in the first place? Well, that was because George Herbert Walker Bush, when he wanted to have his little war so that he could beat Bill Clinton in the '92 election, didn't quite work out for him, but it did help substantially, helped his approval ratings. He wanted to have a little war. He had a 3-day war in Iraq to help out, his oil-rich buddies in Kuwait. After he had told Iraq, yeah, go ahead, invade Kuwait, through April Gillespie, who's been on this program talking about it. So George Herbert Walker Bush put American soldiers at the Bin Sultan Air Base, or the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. And that's what triggered bin Laden. It was like, how dare you? You've got men watching porn and drinking alcohol, defiling the holy soil of Saudi Arabia. You got women showing their elbows and driving vehicles on Saudi soil. And over again in 1996, in 1998, in 1999, in 2000, over and over again in an op-ed published in the New York Times, bin Laden said that he was going to attack America if we didn't remove our soldiers from holy Saudi soil. So George Herbert Walker Bush wanted to have a war in Iraq to help himself get reelected. That war was the thing that set off bin Laden, that led to the 9/11, which then was used by George Herbert Walker Bush's son, George W. Bush, as an excuse for a second illegal, unnecessary war that led to tens of thousands of civilian deaths. When are we going to learn? When are we going to wake up from this stuff? We'll be right back. It's 18 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. We'll continue this conversation. And welcome back. Just a reminder, when the phone rings, I'm going to have to bail out, and we'll stick in some pre-recorded content. But Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's on your mind?
Hey, good morning to you, Tom, and good luck with your back surgery. Listen,
thank you.
America first. They're going to answer again for their sins. In 1944, there were trials held, sedition trials held, and America First was put on trial. What tripped me out about that was you should have seen some of the dignitaries that were involved. These are high-ranking people in government, in business, etc. And primarily what they do, in my opinion, is they foment violence. That's what they do. It started with your boy Wilson in the 1915s when he brought in that attitude of America First. It didn't start with Donald Trump. He brought that in. They had this famous film, a silent film. I think you remember what it was, Birth of a Nation.
Yeah.
He brought that in and just started.
Yeah, Woodrow Wilson played that in the White House. That's how he introduced it to the nation. And it was a recruiting film for the Klan. That's all it was.
And it was a recruiting film. So this isn't our first go-around, but what gives me hope, Thom Hartmann and everybody listen to his program, this is not the first rodeo that America has been through with respect to America First and these sadistic people. Yeah. They will be answering. It's just going to take Merrick Garland a little time, and I want to give a shout-out to the Attorney General because I didn't appreciate what he was doing. He was moving too slow, in my opinion. But I want to say this. Of all the jobs that we got in this country, his job, I wouldn't want it. And thank you, Tom.
It's a tough one. I mean, he's got his family, he's got all kinds of security, he's got all kinds of things going on. Sheila, and thank you, Morris. Sheila in Frankentown, Colorado. Hey, Sheila, what's up?
I'm very concerned. First of all, the war withdrawal from Afghanistan was sloppy. And the Taliban needs back their billions of dollars. It's their money to feed their people. There's kids that are starving. It's a disgrace. Everybody needs to call Joe Biden or write a letter to him, tell him to give them their money so they can feed their
It's like $7 billion, isn't it, that we're sitting on, that we've seized of their money?
Yes, we owe them billions. We are keeping their money, and it's not right.
I agree.
Because it's always the kids, the civilians that suffer. And you could see what's going on, all the starving children. I'm so angry this is a big mistake that he is making. And also, one other thing, did you ever find out why all the people are buying up our land? All the veg funders. Remember the gal said that changed the law in 1968?
Mm-hmm. They're buying up our land because, as Will Rogers famously said, they ain't making no more. It's the best investment you can make.
Yeah, I know, but remember the lady said they changed the law in 68, and this started happening. Did you remember that?
I do. I was never able to verify that. I don't know the details of it.
Yeah, well, I'm from California, not to sound like a racist, but Chinese and Asians have been buying up our land there forever, and that's what has driven the price.
Oh, yeah, as China has gotten richer and richer, they've been looking for places to put their money.
In California, my house is selling for $2 million in Arcadia on the street, and it's ridiculous. And all the whole street was lined up with Asians. So you know who's buying up the land.
Yeah.
Nothing against them. That's our laws.
No,
okay?
it's just the closest foreign country to the West Coast. It's happening in Hawaii as well. Thank you, Sheila. Yeah, Europeans are buying up land on the East Coast. It's not about race. It's not about national origin or anything. It's about economic opportunity. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour, and my doctor's office still hasn't called, so I'm still with you. We'll be right back. Stick around. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Hey, we've got a special report here. This is from a John Robbins piece called Realities for the 90s. The amount of soy grown in the U.S. consumed by livestock, 90%. The amount of corn grown in the U.S. consumed by livestock, 80%. How frequently a child on Earth dies as a result of malnutrition or starvation, every 2.3 seconds. The amount of total United States grain production consumed by livestock, 70%. The amount of U.S. grain exports consumed by livestock, 66%. The number of children who die as a result of starvation every day, 38,000. The amount of the world grain harvest consumed by livestock throughout the 1980s, half. The number of people who will die as a result of malnutrition and starvation this year, 20 million. The number of people who could be nourished with the nutritional value of the grain used to produce meat, 7. And it goes on from there. There's a whole video that summarizes all this stuff that you can find over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let me pick up some of your phone calls here. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, how you doing today? What's up?
Hello, Tom. I just had a flashback. When you were talking about the beginning of the war in Afghanistan and how W got us into that, probably one of my first calls to you in the early 2000s at Air America was about the $5.25 billion judgment against Kellogg or against Halliburton, which were Kellogg Brown Root and Dresser Industries mesothelioma judgments.
Right. My father was one of the people who participated in that lawsuit.
Yeah. Well, see, I cannot help but think that that entered into Dick Cheney's fervor or initiative to falsify information about WMD to get us into Iraq. And that $5.25 billion, I think, was a motivating factor in going into Iraq, and that was just the point I wanted to make. And
makes perfect sense to me, Randy.
Yeah,
makes perfect sense.
So that happened just prior to them taking office. I think it was 99 or something like that. That judge.
Yeah, Cheney had acquired Dresser Industries a year or two earlier on the assumption that the federal government was going to bail out all the asbestos companies, and then they never got that legislation through Congress, and the lawsuits were happening, and Dresser Industries had this huge asbestos liability, which Cheney knew going in, and still, Cheney was like, let's buy the company, and then he got stuck. And they were looking at bankruptcy. I mean, he had run Halliburton into the ground there, but the war bailed him out.
No big contracts. They got the no big contracts after that.
Yeah, billions
through Iraq. So
billions, not just Iraq, Afghanistan too. Afghanistan was the first.
Yes, sir. I've said my piece, and sorry for interrupting. I hope you do well in your back surgery, and we'll be praying for you.
Thank you, Randy.
Have a nice day.
I appreciate it. I'll take all the prayers I can get. Yeah, the back surgery, I hopefully it won't be a big deal. It's just a little laparoscopic thing. It's just, I'll be out for a couple days, and I'll be back and all that kind of stuff. So, 26 minutes past the hour, and I don't know why my doc's office hasn't called yet. Hey, we'll figure it out. I'll see you on the other side in about 5 minutes, so stick around. It's 27 minutes past the hour of the Thom Hartmann Program. I'll be picking up your calls on the other side of the break. Your media support group for We the People, and It's Anything Goes August on this beautiful Monday. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception.
Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. for in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air." End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book, Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. I'm still here. We're still live. And one other question that I have, and that is, Donald Trump doesn't read. We know this. When they gave him security briefings, they had to do it with pictures. Literally, they had to draw pictures for him. He doesn't read. And so other than 2 Corinthians. So the question, who figured out what documents he should steal? I mean, who came up with the list? Who put them in the boxes? Who packed them up and took them down to Mar-a-Lago? Who sorted through them? Who came up with the shopping list? Was it Putin? Was it Mohammed bin Salman? Was it President Xi? Was it Viktor Orban? Was it Steve Bannon? I mean, who came up with the list of classified documents to steal and take down to Mar-a-Lago? I don't know the answer to this question, but I don't think it was Donald Trump. I don't think that he has the bandwidth for that kind of detailed, okay, let's go through thousands of documents and find the ones that Russia or Saudi Arabia would be most likely to pay $2 billion to the Trump family for. Anyhow, let's pick up your phone calls here. Dave, our resident former national security officer. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I wanted to speak about this Afghanistan thing because it's really important. And everybody's just kind of like hovering around the periphery of the truth. And I think it's important that we actually know what's going on here. Remember Andy Puzder? Trump nominated him to be the Secretary of Labor.
I do.
And he's just, yeah. Well, Andy Puzder once said, look, a lot of these jobs that are minimum wage, they should feel lucky because the market doesn't even, the market doesn't even justify paying them minimum wage. Mm-hmm. He didn't even want, you see what I'm saying? He was against a minimum wage.
No, I know that. Didn't he have some kind of scandal that got him bounced out?
It got him bounced out, but he's very influential amongst conservatives. He's written a lot of books. But anyways, what's he got to do with Afghanistan? It's really, really simple. All right. Over the weekend, it was Fareed Zakaria. He talked about the what happened in Afghanistan. And he mentioned that the Russian embassy released all this information on Ashraf Ghani.
Dave,
right?
I just got the phone call from the hospital here, so I've got to bail out, and we're going to play a little bit of pre-recorded content here. My apologies, Dave.
Them have been fired
I'll
from
be
their
back.
jobs. that basically they're doing a stonewalling of any type of reporting of the story.
Yep, I verified that during the break. We looked it up, and in fact, yes, the bikers are there, and they're saying that the police invited them, and the police are not denying it.
Right, right. Well, if you look at this guy, Arredondo, you wouldn't know he was Latino by looking at him. So there definitely seems to be some colorism and some classism and an attempt to, basically enforce white supremacy there.
Oh, geez.
Abbott is kind of staying mum about the whole thing right now.
Yeah.
But it's a travesty what they're doing. And again, just like DeSantis, it's the state interfering with the First Amendment.
There you go. Joe, thank you very much. Yeah, interfering with the press. Spot on. Thank you. Judd in Meadview, Arizona. Hey, Judd, what's up?
How are you doing today, Tom?
I'm great, but I'll get better. How about you, Judd?
I love that. I was just listening to the whole thing about the fuel prices and getting really angry about it. I'm a truck driver. I just got back out on the road after being home like 10 days. And it's just real frustrating, when all these people who believe all this stuff that it's Biden's fault. And I peel the stickers off the fuel pumps all the time. They say, I did that. It's a picture of Joe with his finger pointing, I did that. It's just,
Yeah.
And everything you guys are talking about, it's just, I'm glad you're there. Sometimes I get depressed listening to it because, I'm 63. I'm hoping to retire and get Social Security, but I don't think I can do it without Social Security.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the good news is you're old enough that Social Security will still be around. I'm concerned about, your kids, right, or the generation following you. My kids and grandkids, because the Republicans, George W. Bush said he wanted to privatize Social Security and Medicare. Those were and he put privatization of Medicare in 2003 on the table. It passed Congress, and that's the Medicare Advantage programs. Those are privatized Medicare. Yeah. It's not even Medicare. That's just privatized health insurance for people over 65. And, he didn't get a chance to privatize Social Security, but the next Republican who gets into the White House is going to try. Judd, thanks for the call, and thanks for the affirmation that we're doing the right thing here. Lance in K-Town, Arizona. Hey, Lance, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I'm actually in the Hopi Reservation, Kikatmovi, but it's K-Town, pretty short, so it's all good. Anyway, Tom, I loved how you explained how we have a standing army after the War of 1812. It kind of goes back to these antiquated, writings and texts in the Second Amendment. And so if everybody learned about that, they would know that they're pushing this Second Amendment it's a moot point, really. For me, it is. Also, I wanted to ask you something, and I'll get off the air. Now, if Biden did something after the Buffalo shooting, it was so personal to him that he enacted some type of presidential declaration for the gun shops and the shows to stop selling these assault weapons for 2 months. What do you think would happen? I'll take my answer off the air. What do you think would happen?
Yeah, Lance, I think that what you would see is an enormous blowback from the Republicans and from the gun owners and the NRA, and that would be amplified by right-wing media in a way that would make it seem like a scandal. I do think, though, that if he did that the majority of Americans would be right there with him. And all the polls show that. But the Democrats are sadly playing timid. Lance, thanks a lot for the call. Leo in Putnam County, New York. Hey, Leo, what's up?
Hello, Tom. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
The reason I'm calling is regarding your article about our march to fascism.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually lived it when my parents and I moved to Argentina in 1976, right before the coup d'etat that happened there.
With Pinochet?
And, this is with Isabel Perón.
Oh, that's Chile. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, Chile was, and you can thank Kissinger for both.
Yeah.
But, so I watched how people basically went about their lives. There really wasn't a palpable difference other than the fact that there was more military on the streets, a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, the unmarked police cars that would snatch people off the street. I saw that with one of my neighbors, and my mom was disappeared as well eventually.
Your mom?
She had family. My mom, yeah.
Wow.
And she had her family were from a poor section, and they tended to vote, on the left. And one of my mom's friends got arrested, and eventually that led to one thing or another. But at that point, my parents were separated, so she wasn't living with us. But then we found out afterwards, and my father just took us out. He just said, "We're out of here." We came back to the States.
Right.
But the way people reacted, again, nobody makes waves and they go about their business. Everything seems normal.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. The majority of people are not paying attention to politics. They just want a job, and they want to go to the movies, and fascism doesn't prevent any of that.
Right. And, and I just came back from visiting my nephews in the West Coast of their graduation. And they live in Orange County, and I was appalled and terrified of what I saw, how blatant the authoritarian pro-fascists are out there with their, and this isn't your working class. This is your upper middle class, wealthy, living in counties that that are not poor. And so, in contrast, where I live in South Putnam County, where it's the people who are the trades, like the carpenters and so on, that are not college educated, that are that have the flag up or whatever. Over there, it's the first time I saw an actual American black flag. The one that the one that's all black. But
right. The I claim the right to kill you flag. Yes.
Right, and that's the first time I saw it in person, and it was a couple of blocks from my family's relatives live.
Wow.
And let me tell you, I couldn't wait to get back here.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And it really, I was so sad and so horrified. I mean, I was in tears because I couldn't believe it, and I'm seeing it happen. And people need to somehow wake up, or at least acknowledge that there's something's wrong.
I'm with you, Leo. We absolutely must wake up. Thank you very much for the call and for sharing your story with us. This is America. It is changing right in front of us. We'll be right back. 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And I'm telling you, I may be wrong on this, but I think not, that after Thursday night's hearings, you are going to remember this day, this conversation.
There was a...
And welcome back. Karen in New Orleans, Louisiana. Karen, thank you for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
I'm getting ready to call in my donation after I talk to you. There was a Republican representative that has been voted out because of his inflammatory speech named Steve King. I believe he's from the Midwest section of the town. He said on national television, there's going to be and I believe this was before Trump, the doomsday of 2016, there's going to be a war, and we have all the guns.
That's
Who
right.
you think's going to win?
That's right. Yeah. No,
that's chilling.
Yes, Steve King was a notorious right-wing crackpot and media monger. He used to come on my program. I used to debate Steve King. And,
really?
This was like 10 years ago, before he started being explicitly racist. Back when he was just a normal Republican who was a little to the right. I would debate him on issues, but he just went totally over the edge, and we stopped inviting him on the show. And and welcome back. I just got off the phone with my doctor's office and learned all about the surgery I'm going to have on Thursday at 5:30 in the morning. Send me some good vibes. I will appreciate it. So anyhow, 46 minutes past the hour. We still have a minute and a half here to a hard break. So let's pick up a phone call. Christopher in Vancouver, Washington. Hey, Christopher, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. You're having Valerie on today. And
I am.
That's great. That's great, because I want to ask something that no one on TV has asked. You were on to it before you had to break to the hospital. Trump is not computer savvy. I can't believe that these documents are in hard copy form in a vault someplace, opposed to them residing on a secure server not connected to the internet. So my question is, how did he get those documents? Did somebody print them out? I mean, I doubt that they have a printer in that room. How did they get them?
You know, there have been people reporting that occasionally people would bring documents to Trump and he would say, I want to see the original. And that frequently he would take documents from the Oval Office up to his residence. And so it may well be that during the 4 years that he was president, he was simply squirreling away top secret and sensitive compartmentalized information into his residence. The question is why? Was he doing it because Putin wanted him to? Was he doing it because he thought he could sell it to the Saudis and get $2 billion, laundered by his son-in-law? Was he doing it because he's just mentally ill and he's got a hoarding syndrome? You see that with some very, very rich people. Instead of, hoarding newspapers, they hoard money. In this case, maybe Trump was hoarding papers. I mean, nobody really knows, Christopher. That's the problem. But those are the possibilities that spring to my mind.
Yes, but I'd love for Valerie to tell us, what kind of form are those in, and how did he get them?
Oh well, we know they're paper. We know they're paper, and we know that a lot of them are originals. I mean, both of those things have been in the press. How many of them, or what percentage of them, are originals? No idea. And of course, how and why and who sorted them and who packed them. And now they're going through and fingerprinting every one of them, So I'm thinking that there's probably some people who worked in the Trump White House who are a little nervous, shall we say.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So I am back live with you. We will be picking up more of your phone calls in just a moment. It's 48 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Joan in Rochester, Minnesota, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind today?
Well, I was thinking about the problem as far as women are concerned. And this country and I don't know how many other countries, have spent many, many years helping women in all the foreign countries to be better educated, to be more part of their community, and to get a say-so. And even Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC, who had a program for desks for kids. Mm-hmm. And fast forward to the United States right now, and we have the Republican Party or the faction of it that is trying to reverse everything that's ever been done in this country, and it's like it's trying to change places, put us into the dark ages. And I am finding this a very despicable and scary thing for this country, and I'm very happy for the women in the other countries who have been allowed to advance and become better citizens and maybe more of their communities. And it may take them quite a few years, but they're headed in the right direction, and we sure as heck are headed in the wrong direction. This is an abomination to their mothers, their grandmothers, their wives, their daughters. Any female in this country will almost have no rights if they get their way.
Isn't it breathtaking that in Iraq women have more rights than in the United States, at least with regard to their own reproductive capacity?
Yep, and I find that I'm way past the age of any to have any concerns about childbirth and dying in those situations, but it is a very scary thing that we have men in this country who have put women at the bottom of the whole thing and are stepping on all their rights while we're also trying to help women in other countries.
Yeah.
Something's wrong with this picture, and it needs really to be fixed, and women need to start standing up more for themselves, and their men, their husbands and dads and grandfathers should be standing up for the women in this country and not let them be trounced on by a handful of Republican, whatever you want to call them. They're not men. They're something else. So anyway, give it some thought and give it some talk on your shows, and maybe we can get some action on that. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome, Joan. Yeah. I mean, you just laid it out. And the problem, I think, is that we've got an American Taliban here. It's a Christian Taliban. But, you know, they want women under their thumbs. You've got, you know, at least one billionaire who's funding a lot of these right-wing causes who has come right out and said that we should repeal the 19th Amendment, that women shouldn't have the right to vote, that was when all our problems began. I mean, it's pretty breathtaking when you think about it, Joan. And even more breathtaking, you know, I used to debate this with Phyllis Schlafly on this program, and why a woman would take these positions. You know, she was the kind of single-handedly stopped the Equal Rights Amendment. So it's not just men, but it's an amazing time we live in. Joan, thank you for the call, and it's such a clear, concise articulation of your position. Thank you. Very well done. It's 52 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So Mother Jones Magazine got a hold of some leaked audio that was taken of Steve Bannon. He was talking with a group of people on October 31st, 2020. That's in the days prior to the election. Now, at this point, everybody in America who was paying serious attention knew that Trump was going to lose this election. The polls were showing this. I mean, he lost by 7 million votes. You can't bury that. You can't hide that. That's a freight train coming down the road at you. He knew he was going to lose. Bannon knew he was going to lose. And Bannon tells this crowd that Trump is going to declare victory on election night because he knows that a lot of the Democrats didn't want to show up in person at the polls because of COVID, and so they mailed in their ballots. Republicans weren't so concerned, and Trump is going to be ahead. And he's predicting exactly what's going to happen, which raises the question, how well planned was this? It really looks like there's a conspiracy. You can check it out. There's a whole video about it at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Mike in Schererville, Indiana. Hey, Mike, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I can't help but feel that Mike Pompeo is neck deep in this document.
You think I'm guessing that it was more Mark Meadows, but apparently this is like a 4-year hoarding binge that Trump was on, not just something he did at the last minute to get, come up with all those boxes of stuff.
I was corrected by Louise. She said, yeah, he started off with the CIA. I think he spent a year or so in the CIA rooting around in the records and the archives and stuff like that, and then became Secretary of State, and then was able to be like a communications go-between between the Saudis and whoever else.
Could be. By the way, that's Joyce who's answering the phone. Louise fills in for Joyce, but Joyce is the one normally answering the phone. So that's
thank you,
Joyce
for the correction.
Yeah. So, but yeah, whether it's Pompeo, Pompeo has lost like 50 pounds. I mean, this guy is serious about wanting to be president. He's getting into shape and doing policy speeches and all this kind of stuff. I don't think he has a snowball's chance in hell, but, we'll see. Mike, thanks for the call, and thanks for bringing that up. Lamont in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. Hey, Lamont, what's on your mind today?
Yes, Tom, I have a question for you. A while back, while Trump was in office, and you may know the answer to this, there was a Chinese national from China caught on Mar-a-Lago's campus, and she was walking around. She had a load of identifications from for her
phony IDs. Yep.
Yeah, phony IDs. Yeah, and she had all kinds of information that sort of like indicated that she should be there, but she wasn't supposed to be there. And then she was, I guess, escorted off the property. She never got to see Trump. But my question is to you, have you heard any more about this? Because, well, how does that happen where, you have a foreign national who's associated with another country and they're roaming around on your property, and it seems as though that their whole purpose for being there is to get information.
Yeah.
So have you heard any more about this person?
I have not heard specifically about her, Lamont, but I have heard, it kind of falls into the category of rumor right now, but stories that there are concerns that, pretty much anybody can show up there. And especially if you pay the $200,000, then you have the run of the place. And the question is, how many of these people are actually Russian spies, Chinese spies, Saudi spies? Who knows? Lamont, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Common Sense for the 21st Century by Roger Hallam. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse. This is from the foreword. I was there for the past 20 years. Climate activism. It didn't work. We protested in our hundreds of millions. It didn't work. We raised billions to reach people and politicians. It didn't work. We signed countless online petitions. They didn't work. We looked to the United Nations to resolve the crisis. It didn't work. We trusted progressive politicians and their reforms. That didn't work. Al Gore had a big concert and a PR campaign. It didn't work. Countless NGOs, non-governmental organizations, did their best, and it didn't work. I worked with green NGO campaigns, champagne environmentalists, and lying politicians. I was wasting my time. I had a clue back in 2007 that there might be a fundamental flaw with the reformist approach, the problem with the political influence of the industrial billionaires like the Koch brothers and other fossil fuel bosses. It was another warm night in Los Angeles. I was invited to an exclusive event. A Tesla Roadster prototype was going to be shown to press and guests. We took turns riding around the block. I watched in amazement as the Tesla was at the end of the street in the blink of an eye, with barely a sound. I felt like a caveman seeing a television. Incredible. While I was working on a campaign in 2007, I had an idea for how to save the world with a massive music event and a huge fundraising effort led by celebrities to fund the biggest PR campaign to save the environment. It would be a huge global event, just like Live Aid. I sought out a prominent journalist at the Tesla event to tell about my scheme and bask in the glory of his praise. The journalist was Vijay Vithswaram from The Economist, now a life member of this Council on Foreign Relations. After listening carefully to my concept, he smiled and laughed. I was stunned. Laughter? How could I be so wrong? Vijay wasn't being cruel or unkind. He thought I was naive. He said, the fossil fuel industry has enough money to outspend any public relations campaign you might try by 100 times. He carried on talking, but I had stopped listening. I had my answer. He was right. Crestfallen, I sheepishly nodded and walked away. Over the next 12 years, I watched as fossil fuel companies used their vast financial capital to buy political parties, trick NGOs into fruitless schemes like the U.S. Cap and Trade Initiative, sow doubt about climate science in the public discourse, and slow policy reform to a snail's pace. Their strategy worked. As climate skepticism continued to spread, climate change mitigation dropped down voters' priorities. With Trump and Putin in power, it was over. I quit climate campaigning. Then I heard about Extinction Rebellion closing 5 bridges in London. Then they closed central London in April 2019. This was something different. I met Roger Hallam and he explained his ideas for a radical plan to create real change. This included, first, tell the truth. Climate skepticism was pushed by the mainstream media, which spread doubt on climate science like a plague, leaving inaction in its wake. The scale of the crisis is being played down, and we must get the truth out. Second, nonviolent civil disobedience. We need to get arrested, tens of thousands of us, more. No more protests, no more petitions. Instead, nonviolent civil disobedience, lots of it, and on a large scale. Close down cities until the politicians take action, or until the people do. Third, universalism. In other words, the ecological and climate crisis should not be owned by any political ideology, culture, age, or gender. As Roger Hallam says, we all have a stake in the future. We should all be allowed to engage in action. I was convinced. We need a new approach to save ourselves and the planet. We need to spark a worldwide rebellion. We need some common sense for the 21st century. That foreword was written by, quote, anonymous climate activist. So this now is the introduction to the book. It is time to grow up and see the world as it is. There are some things which are undeniably real. There are some things we cannot change, and one of those is the law of physics. Ice melts when the temperature increases. Crops die in a drought. Trees burn in forest fires. Because these things are real, we can also be certain about what the future holds. We are now heading into a period of extreme ecological collapse. Whether or not this leads to the extinction of the human species largely depends on whether revolutionary changes happen within our societies within the next decade. This is not a matter of ideology, but of simple math and physics. The United Nations has estimated that we need to reduce carbon emissions by half within a decade to have a 50% chance of avoiding a global catastrophe. Of course, this is likely to be an underestimate, as recent science shows permafrost melting 90 years earlier than forecasted and Himalayan glaciers melting twice as fast as expected. The book, Common Sense for the 21st Century, by Roger Hallam, the co-founder of the Extinction Rebellion. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is Valerie Plame, former CIA covert operations officer, one-time Democratic candidate in New Mexico. Valerie Plame, Plame, is the Twitter handle, is her Twitter handle. And Valerie, my recollection from the last time you were on the program is that you also wrote a book and may have a website. I don't have that information in front of me. You want to refresh my memory, please?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for having me on. Yes, my memoir was Fair Game, and then I wrote 2 spy thrillers, Blowback and Burned, and all that information is at ValeriePlame.com.
Very cool. Okay, thank you so much for that. So, you know, I've wanted to talk to a spy about what's going on with all this classified information that Donald Trump stole. I saw this Newsweek report over the weekend that was essentially speculating that this is that it may contain payroll information on U.S. assets abroad. That's the kind of thing I think, and this is where I want to reality check this with a professional like yourself. It seems to me like that's the sort of thing where a foreign government, say Saudi Arabia or Russia, might enter into a bidding war where they might offer as much as $2 billion for the information and, launder it through the Trump family via Jared. Is that way out there thinking like that?
No, I think Trump has given us every reason to doubt his word at every turn since 2015, of course, when he really came on the national political stage. The original reporting from this, as you noted, Newsweek, Bill Arkin, this is a serious guy. He has spent decades covering national security issues. So I take what his reporting says very seriously. And as you note, I'm a spy, an intelligence officer. I am not a national security expert or lawyer in terms of what's classified and can the president declassify waving his magic wand. But as a former covert CIA officer, what strikes me most about all the news that we've heard and the documents is why. Why would he have this information? The latest from Arkin was that there may have been lists of payrolls of U.S. spies, in addition to highly sensitive nuclear documents. There was on the docket that was taken out all the materials, not much detail, but we have enough to be absolutely terrified. And the only question that has to be answered, and this is really important, is why would he have this? This is not, we were accidentally moving the personal effects out of the Trump White House to Mar-a-Lago, and we put an easy chair in and a potted plant and 15 boxes of classified information, and we had no idea. The more we hear about this, everyone in the intelligence community is deeply, deeply concerned.
Yeah, which makes absolute sense. Donald Trump generally doesn't even read. So I'm wondering who came up with the shopping list. 15 boxes is not inconsequential. And this is the guy who, multiple national security officials have told us if you didn't present it to him with pictures and graphics, he didn't understand it. So I can't imagine that he went through and picked out these documents himself. Who might have, and to my earlier question, is this could this be the kind of information that a foreign government literally would want to pay the Trump family a couple of $2 billion for?
Oh, absolutely. But that is speculation. What we know from a former intelligence officer and administrative person is John Bolton, who said that many times when he was in the White House, Trump would ask to have from his briefers, have the papers left behind. And the briefers generally said, well, we really prefer to take that with us, Mr. President, but sometimes they forgot and they were left there. And what you said earlier was absolutely true. Trump does, every president, every intelligence, every time a new president comes in, the intelligence briefers around him need to adjust to how that president takes in information. And this is, everyone takes in information differently. Trump is not a reader, so things were presented to him in sort of basic pictures. It is unusual that there would be all these documents, printed documents. It just doesn't add up. And as an intelligence professional, I just have to keep going back to why. Why does he have this? Who would benefit from this? There is absolutely, he has changed his story so many times just in the last week. It was only last Monday that we became aware of the FBI search that was completely lawful. It was signed off. There has to be really good probable cause, which Merrick Garland and the DOJ and the FBI have absolutely stuck by they have demonstrated to the American people why, in fact, this was justified. I'm somewhat heartened because Merrick Garland, I don't know him, but by all accounts, he really is a by-the-book kind of guy. He is going to be sure everything is absolutely done lawfully. And given the incredible outrage on the right over this, that's more important than ever.
Yeah, we're speaking with Valerie Plame, former CIA covert operations officer, author of multiple books, ValeriePlame.com, Valerie Plame on Twitter. Valerie, my observation, and I, this is obviously not unique to me, is that Trump is typically motivated by a very narrow range of things. Familial loyalty and friendship and stuff like that is not typically on his radar screen. It's money, or he wants to have sex with somebody, or he wants to be famous. I can't think of anything else that that he has spent much of his life.
It's not ideology, that's for sure.
Yeah,
he has none.
Yeah, exactly. He's not an ideologue. He doesn't have some philosophical core that he's driving off of. So I don't see how having these documents would get him sex with anybody. And I'm not sure that he wanted to be famous for having these documents, which leaves basically either he has these documents because he thinks they can be translated into money, or they've already been translated into money, or he has these documents because he's being blackmailed by some foreign government that ultimately wants to get their hands on these documents. Does that make sense to you? And if so, what do you think is the most likely explanation?
All of that is a possibility. In addition, I'd like to add that when you're an intelligence officer and you're recruiting a foreign asset to spy, to provide critical intelligence for our senior U.S. policymakers, there's a whole bunch of motivating factors, money, ideology, compromise, and so forth. There's an acronym for it. But in Trump's case, he may have convinced himself at this point, his justification may be, this is just my speculation, that he is holding these documents and perhaps to pass them because he thinks that America is simply falling apart. He has embraced Russia and to a lesser extent Saudi Arabia from the very beginning of his administration. Mm-hmm. So if he really feels that the United States is in such a terrible place, he would want to be able to help the United States through the aid of, say, Russia, and these documents would help. It is twisted. It's bizarre. Unprecedented doesn't even begin to touch where we are in our history. On really bad days, I'm deeply, deeply concerned about our democracy, and this is just adding fuel to that fire. Yeah. Because I heard you the other day speak about this. People, I don't have a lot of friends that are Trump supporters, but I do have them, and I know them to be good people. Truly good people. They try to live good lives, and they have somehow managed to simply justify all of this in their mind, or they see this as yet another just, the liberal bias, liberal media making a mountain out of a molehill. After all, I mean, didn't Obama take millions of documents too? It is so distorted and so twisted. And
yeah. In fact, no, he didn't.
Your question was, is he going to? Yeah, will this turn it? Will this turn supporters away from Trump? And I'm afraid the GOP has become a cult of personality rather than actually
So your theory that maybe he has these documents in order to kind of help America make a transition is kind of, isn't the predicate for that Trump doesn't believe in Republican democracy in a democratic republic, but rather he believes that the best form of government is an oligarchic autocracy like we have in Russia, like we have in what Bolsonaro's trying to turn Brazil into, what Modi seems to be pushing India in the direction of.
Hungary.
Certainly Hungary, yes, with Viktor Orban. Now we've got, the Philippines, with the Duterte and Marcos dynasties. That basically he thinks that, turning America into a strongman country, whether he's the strongman or Ron DeSantis is the best way to go. Make America safe for the autocrats. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, that's what I'm suggesting, because from Trump's every action since he's been in office, none of them have bolstered actually our democratic norms, and to the opposite effect, in fact.
Right. Small d.
I know that my former colleagues and I am included in our utter alarm. He early on, when it became exceedingly evident how much Russia had interfered in the 2016 elections, far more than, as I've done more reading on it, far more than I even understood, and that Trump is sort of like the perfect, what we would call an unwitting asset. I mean, he might be able to have that fig leaf in his mind, that he's not really spying for Russia, he's helping America, or whatever twisted rationale he might come up with. He's a perfect unwitting asset.
Yeah, a dupe, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Amazing. Valerie Plame, ValeriePlame.com for all her writings, and Valerie Plame on Twitter. Valerie, thank you so much for dropping by. It's always so nice talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
It's a fascinating perspective. We'll be back. We'll continue this conversation after the break. It's 18 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. Has treasonous Trump declared war on America through his MAGA followers? I've got a couple amazing stories to share with you on this. Stick around. And welcome back. Mike in Fresno, California, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Mike, what's up? Nope, Mike just hung up. Sometimes that happens, people, they try to unmute their phone and they hit the wrong button. Mike, there is a line open if you call right back. Michael in Newport Beach, California. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to KPFK.
Hey, hey, good luck with your back surgery. I didn't really get what you're going to have there,
Thank
but
you.
I've had several of them, and I'm your same age, and I'm going strong.
Good. I had a disc that bulged out, and, it's crushing the nerve and all that kind of stuff, so they're just going to pull part of the disc out.
And when you said orthopedic, man, you know what you're doing, because I went in, 3 of mine were full on, blown on, and the recovery is ridiculous. Wow. And so good luck.
Yeah, well, this is just one, so hopefully I'll be back. I'll be back. In fact, we're going to test, my home studio this afternoon, so that hopefully I'll only miss a couple of days. And when I'm gone, Jefferson's going to fill in for me, and he does a marvelous job, so you'll be in good hands.
Right.
So what's
you
up,
keep
Michael?
Moving, what you do. Yeah, what flew me up off my back a little while ago was the gentleman who called in and reminds us, as the Fox people do always, and it just about how, and it irritates me to hell, is how many guns they always seem to have in the bullets, but they do not realize what is on the other side. And I know plenty of people out in Nevada, upper northern Nevada. They're not militia. They're not ready to go. They don't want to fight nobody, but they have guns, okay? And I'm a peaceful Catholic boy, and I have no intention on anything other than, but it irritates me that these people on the right side, they don't seem to believe that we have guns and we have bullets, and we know how to put bullets in guns, and it's negative kind of a thing to put out there, but it's true. And
but it is not going to. Yes, some people may have guns to defend themselves against what they perceive to be, right-wing marauding mobs. But But frankly, we're not going to have a civil war in the United States. It's not going to be the North against the South or the red against the blue. There will be, there already is, stochastic terrorism going on, where a leader like Donald Trump says, oh my God, terrible things are happening, and his followers take that as the cue that they should attack the FBI building in Cincinnati. That has been happening ever since Tim McVeigh, and it will continue to happen as long as people on the right continue to whip up this anti-government sentiment. Now you got Rand Paul out there talking about defund the FBI, right? That kind of stuff is putting our law enforcement agencies at risk and our law enforcement agents at risk. But I don't think that we're going to see Americans shooting at each other beyond that sort of thing.
One more thought?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, Robert E. Lee was not, you can't find it in his famous anything, speeches or quotes, but he was said to have quoted several times there. I'm not sure what year of the war, but just there are too many of them. And I find solace in that.
After the war, Robert E. Lee was apologizing and was trying to make things right and was trying to clean things up, at least for a little while. I mean, I'm not a scholar of Robert E. Lee, but I've read that history. So, there's a couple of good quotes from him after the war that are, but I'm sorry I don't have them at the tip of my tongue, but they're good. Michael, thank you for the call, and thanks for listening to us there on KPFK. It's 22 minutes past the hour. We'll be back in just a moment. Stick around. It's Talk Media for the rest of us. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. And welcome back. 23 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. Dawn in San Antonio, Texas. Hey, Dawn, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm getting there.
Good. I just wanted to give everyone a heads up. I was on Twitter yesterday, and I was reading about somebody was warning about they are purging voters in Texas.
Oh, yeah.
And they're making a lot of mistakes. And
Georgia and Ohio and Indiana.
They have 29 days to do it because the last day to register here is October 12th. That's in Texas. I don't know about the other states.
Yeah.
So everybody, I put my calendar on notice. It's going to tell me every month to check my registration.
Good idea.
So everybody needs to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you live in San Antonio. That's a blue town, if I'm remembering correctly. So they'll probably be purging like crazy in San Antonio.
Well, I have not had any problems with my voting. I've started, absentee ballot since I turned 65, but. Yeah, there will be problems, so everybody needs to check.
Yeah. Well said.
Check.
Dawn, thank you.
Also,
thanks. Oh, go ahead.
One more thing about the land grabs that are going on. I think a lot of that is about water rights.
Which land grab are you talking about?
Have the land grab. All these countries and stuff coming in and buying.
Foreign countries buying land in the United States.
I think it's going to be, a lot of it's going to be about water rights.
Or could be.
We're going to have water shortages.
Yeah, we already are, yeah. I think frankly, I think most of it is just, good investment. But you may well be right, Dawn. And
if it gets down to food and water, they won't care where they're sleeping. They're going to care where they're going to get their next.
Well, they're already, I mean, you've got, several of your major packing plants, meat packing operations and things like that are basically, just owned by, in part or all, by foreign operations, typically Chinese, and they're shipping a lot of their stuff to China. So, hey, they're already using our crops and growing our food here, and then of course we're refining the poisonous tar sands oil here, and we get the pollution, and we ship the diesel fuel offshore. So, Dawn, thank you, excellent points all, thank you. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, for taking my call as usual. You alluded a little bit about this. Trump had in his possession all of these sensitive documents for a year and 8 months, he may very well already done the damage. I mean,
I
as
agree.
far as I'm concerned.
I agree. In fact, I think he did, and that's why his son-in-law got $2 billion.
Well, yeah, and, you know, people are not talking about that, but I cannot believe this guy is not in jail yet. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah,
Anyway,
no, keep in mind,
you,
know, Mohammed bin Salman, about 3 years ago, was bragging about the fact that he had Jared Kushner in his pocket, number one. Number two, Jared Kushner went over there, and we now know that Kushner gave MBS, you know, Mr. Bonesaw, gave him U.S. intelligence reports that indicated which Saudi citizens may not be loyal to him. And those were the people he locked up in that hotel, you know, in the what was it, the Four Seasons or whatever it was, you know, the fancy schmancy hotel there, and tortured some of them and extracted cash from them. I mean, we've already got Jared Kushner sharing U.S. intelligence with Saudi Arabia. That's a known fact. So, you know, why shouldn't more be coming? Alfredo, thanks for the call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I think we've had a Manchurian candidate in the White House for 4 years, and thank God he's out right now, and the truth is starting to come out. Today from Truth in Our Times by David E. McCraw, Deputy General Counsel of the New York Times, the #2 lawyer for the New York Times. This is in Chapter 1 titled Election Day. It opens with a tweet from Donald Trump. The failing New York Times has been wrong about me from the very beginning. Sadly, I would lose the primaries. Oh, said I would lose the primaries on the general election. Fake news. November 8, 2016. At 10 p.m., I made one last circuit of the newsroom. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, stood near the political desk, looking on with his wife and a small group of others connected somehow to the Times. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan remained in doubt, but the reality was sinking in. Donald Trump was on the verge of winning the American presidency. I'd been in newsrooms on election nights before. I know how it's supposed to be. The only thing that ever mattered was the horse race, think Gore-Bush, or the historic moment, think Obama-McCain. There was no investment in which candidate was winning. He or she was destined to disappoint in the long run. And the dominant emotion was a certain not quite cynical detachment amid the electric buzz of the vote count and projections and the anticipation of relief that the endless push of the campaign was finally over. Sure, you couldn't ignore the victories or the big picture moments, and the day after stories would be celebratory in their way, duly restrained but with a nod to victory itself. Not unlike the next day account of a Super Bowl game or Game 7 of the World Series. Capture the triumph for a night or relish the race too close to call. Leave the dancing and crying for others, for the believers. But this night was like no other election night. There had been an investment, not just journalistic, but spiritual. Donald Trump had campaigned not just against Hillary Clinton, but also against the New York Times and the American press, the mainstream American press. And his astonishing rise to the top of the Republican Party had been built on his near daily attacks on facts, on the very idea that facts matter. For journalists who approach truth like a secular religion and who have seen 1,000 times how a single true story could gut the political career of a lying politician, it had been a year of faith-shaking disbelief. A line had not just been crossed, but obliterated. The shock was palpable as the numbers came in, laced for some with the fading hope for a different outcome among people who generally wanted nothing more than a story worth telling. And there was still a paper to put out, a reckoning to account for. It was too much on an already long night. I slipped away. At the elevators, I ran into Sue Craig and a guy who was obviously not from the Times. Sue had broken one of the biggest stories of the campaign. She was the one who went to her mailbox one day in September and found pages from Donald Trump's tax returns in an envelope. She introduced me to her acquaintance. He had once worked for Trump. I didn't ask why he was there. Like me, Sue had decided to get away. It's too weird here, she said. We all got on the elevator.
Sue, who had written a devastating story about Trump, me, whose letter to Trump's lawyers had lit up the internet for a week in October, and one of Trump's guys. We rode in silence, a strange tableau on the strangest night of the year. 14 hours earlier, as I came into the building, the Times security guard had called me over. They wanted to make sure I knew about the plans for the next morning. In the quirky ways that things happen at the Times, I had become the lawyer to see for all the things that security guys encountered, from the intruder who pilfered women's shoes to the anonymous letter weaponized with razor blades. The Times was printing thousands of extra newspapers, and tables were going to be set up outside for all the people who would be showing up to buy the New York Times for posterity's sake. The headline, I later learned, was going to read, Madam President. We had been caught flat-footed 8 years earlier when Barack Obama had made history. By the time I arrived for work early in the morning of the 2008 election, the line was already starting to snake down the sidewalk. Soon there were hundreds of Obama supporters who thought, and why wouldn't they, that the place to buy a copy of the New York Times was surely at the New York Times. Lots of things happen at the Times building. Selling newspapers is not one of them. Employees were pressed into emergency duty to cart bundles of newspapers from the Times printing plant in Queens, and the long lines outside the building stretched on into the afternoon. But it was Obama's victory in 2012 that was on my mind this morning. I vote in a neighborhood that is predominantly black and middle class. In 2012, following a drumbeat of stories about how Republicans hoped to suppress voter turnout, I walked into my polling place at a local school 8 minutes after it opened. The line already extended back to the schoolhouse door. Did y'all sleep here, a guy wanted to know as he stepped into the foyer. On this morning in 2016, I had arrived before dawn. I was the only one in line at my precinct's table. That all seemed like a strangely distant memory as midnight approached. I had made my escape from the building with Sue and the Trump guy. At home, I sat alone in the glow of the TV screens as the states that mattered fell into place for the Republicans. I turned it off. Donald Trump was about to become president of the United States. The next morning, in a light drizzle on a gray November day, the newspaper sales tables were set up outside the building as planned. No one stopped. The vendors sat idly amid the stacks. There was no Madam President front page. Instead, the headline read, Trump triumphs, and the first two paragraphs of the lead story talked about how the vote threatened convulsions throughout the country and made an early mention of those who had watched with alarm the rise of Trump. Nearly half the country had voted for the man. I had just spent a weekend in October back in rural Illinois, in my hometown, and for a moment I allowed myself to see the coverage through the eyes of the rest of America. At least it was one. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. There's an amazing study out of Qatar, the country in the Middle East, back from 2020. Now, this was back before there was a vaccine for COVID. And they looked at over 30,000 healthcare workers in Qatar and wanted to figure out, what might reduce the risk of getting COVID. Again, this is before there was any vaccine. And what they found was that people who had had a flu vaccine were less likely to get COVID than people who hadn't had the flu vaccine. This is absolutely remarkable, and nearly 90% less likely to develop severe COVID. It was 30% less likely to test positive and 89% less likely to develop severe COVID compared with their coworkers who had not. It's an amazing study. The whole details are on a video over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back, 35 minutes past the hour. So is Donald Trump trying to have his most violent followers declare war on the United States? It is certainly looking that way to me. Over on Trump's Nazi-infested Truth social media platform, some people close to Trump
used the actual warrant that Trump had. When the FBI released the warrant per the court order, they redacted the name of the two FBI agents who served the warrant. And they do that so that, those FBI agents don't find themselves being doxxed, being the subjects of, hate and death threats and things like that. Well, over on Trump's Nazi-infested social media site, they actually named the two FBI agents. So, as a result of this, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security on Friday issued a joint intelligence bulletin warning about violent threats from Trump supporters to law enforcement, judicial, and government personnel and property. Quote, including a threat to place a so-called dirty bomb in front of the FBI headquarters and, quote, general calls for civil war and armed rebellion. This is no joke. This is serious stuff. Ricky Schiffer, a Trump supporter with suspected ties to a far-right extremist group and an unspecified connection to January 6th. He was apparently at the rally or at the riot. Was shot and killed by police on Thursday after he went after the FBI with an AR-15 and a nail gun. Trump on Friday denied that he took nuclear weapons secrets, but then he said, oh yeah, Obama took 33 million pages of documents, including some that pertain to nuclear, which, by the way, is a lie. It's simply not true. The 33 million pages of documents are being held by the National Archives, not by Obama. Obama never took that stuff. And then Trump tried to say all they had to do was ask. Well, it turns out that back in June, they didn't just ask, they issued a subpoena. And his lawyer signed a document saying, no, you guys have everything. Turned out that was a lie. I mean, there's just been this whole series of lies. And then on Thursday, just before Garland announced that they were going to unseal the search warrant, just before Garland went on the air, before it was known that Garland was going to go on the air, Trump sent a private message to the Attorney General saying, quote, the country is on fire. Now, how is that not a threat? Look out, Garland. If you stir things up, I'm going to fan the flames. And then Don Jr. comes out and says, again, the nation's on fire. And he goes on to say, Biden and the Democrats are following in the footsteps of all the third world communist dictators that the left worships. Their out-of-control Department of Justice is ripping this country apart with how they've openly targeted their political enemies. None of that is true. These are naked lies being told by the Trump family because the Trump family are literally lifelong career criminals. And you say, oh, Hartmann, you're exaggerating. They've been convicted of it. Trump University was a scam. They were convicted of it. The Trump charity was a scam. They were convicted of it. They've been sued over 3,000 times. Trump's got 20 women coming after him for a sexual assault and rape. E. Jean Carroll's rape charges still active against Donald Trump. And then Donald Trump went on his Nazi-infested social media thing, Truth Social, and said, radical left Democrats have a total stranglehold over the FBI and DOJ. It is so out of control. Great simmering anger. This is an incitement to stochastic terrorism. This is Trump's effort to get FBI agents killed. It's just that simple. And it's almost happened twice now in the last 48 hours. He goes on to say, Trump again, the country is in a very dangerous position. There's tremendous anger like I've never seen before over all the scams and this new one, years of scams and witch hunts and now this. The people of this country, Trump said, are not going to stand for another scam. Terrible things are going to happen. Years of fake witch hunts and phony Russia schemes and scams. Nothing happens to those people who perpetuate that. Nothing happens to them. And then they break into a president's house, a sneak attack. No, it wasn't a sneak attack. He was notified in advance. His lawyer was there and accompanied the officers. They didn't even wear FBI jackets. They didn't want to embarrass the president or let anybody know they were there. Trump and his family watched the whole search on closed-circuit TV. They've got the whole Mar-a-Lago place wired. But Trump is out there, spinning these lies. And then Steve Bannon goes on the air and says, yes, we are a threat to the American state. He admits it. He said, and I quote, "Does anybody ever mention the FBI as being real assistance whatsoever except for marginal cases? No, they've turned into the American Gestapo. They have to be defunded. They say, oh, this is dangerous talk. No, it's not. It's a political process. These institutions aren't permanent," Bannon says. "Institutions should last as long as they're effective for the American people in our nation." He said they didn't say the country, they didn't say America as a nation, they didn't say the American people, the American state. And they are absolutely correct. You said the quiet part out loud. We are a threat to the American state, says Steve Bannon. Even when I was in SDS, I never would have said something like that. We were trying to create a better American state, not tear down what we had. It's just breathtaking. This is just breathtaking. And you look at all the excuses that Donald Trump has gone through. The first one, everybody is corrupt. Second one, I would have turned it over. The government had simply asked. That was a lie. That was on Monday. On Tuesday, it's totally fine that Trump took all those documents. The only issue is that he racked up some library fines. Seriously, Mike Turner, the congressman who was on the House Intelligence Committee, he said that the FBI may have raided Trump's residence simply because, quote, he in effect checked out books too long from the archivist, end quote. Right, that was Tuesday's excuse. Then also later on Tuesday, Trump came out with another excuse. The FBI put it there. He said, we watched the raid on closed circuit TV. They were planting evidence. Right, well, that turned out not to be true. Wednesday, Trump's excuse. This is all the fault of the deep state run by ultra-liberal Christopher Wray. The Christopher Wray, the FBI director that Trump put into place. The FBI director that scotched investigations into January 6th over and over and over again. The FBI director who's a member of the Federalist Society. Thursday, Trump's excuse. What about Obama? Obama did it too. In fact, he's a secret Muslim. He did it worse than I did. Well, it turns out that that's not true. Then another excuse on Thursday. Well, they didn't raid Trump quickly enough. They waited a year and a half to go get them. What's the big deal? If they could wait a year and a half, they must not be very important documents. That's his latest excuse. Well, not his latest. That was Thursday's. Friday's excuse? Congressman Stewart. Well, look at the premise of most of your questions. Was it nuclear? Hey, heck, maybe it was aliens. Right, aliens. Then Trump came out and said, well, maybe it was just a tiny bit of super classified stuff. Brett Baer laid that. There's only one one set of documents that's listed SCI. Then Peter Navarro comes out with an excuse. Well, Trump was just trying to prevent World War III. He said Trump needed to get them to let the American people know what was in them so we can stay out of wars and get more jobs. And then David Martasco says, no, it was the GSA, the General Services Administration. They packed the boxes. It was all their fault. That was Friday's excuse. And then Saturday's excuse. This is hysterical. This was Ryan Riley. He said, when it finally dawned on Trump in the twilight of his presidency that he wouldn't be living in the White House for another 4 years, he had a problem. He'd barely packed and had to move out quickly. So, yeah, he just accidentally stole all those secret documents. I mean, does it get any weirder than this? Over at The Writing, this newsletter of, what's going on the right wing. We read the right wing so you don't have to. Let me just share with you some of the headlines from today. This is from the last 24 hours. The New York Post. Merrick Garland's Trump raid is a farce of the law. Newsmax. FBI raid, one of the most dangerous assaults in U.S. history. El American. The FBI official cover story for its Trump raid defies belief. Blue State Conservative. Merrick Garland's scary comments about the Mar-a-Lago raid. Town Hall. The FBI is already interfering with the 2024 election. Front page. American Stasi is the headline. Fox News. Trump will do whatever he can to help the country after the FBI raid. Wall Street Journal. The payback for Mar-a-Lago will be brutal. Washington Examiner. By 2024, most will have forgotten about the FBI Trump raid. SteveGruber.com. IRS agents are literally gunning for you. big league politics. This is satanic child abuse. And WorldNet Daily, high cancer rates after post-jab. Right, people are getting cancer from the vaccine? No, they're not. It's, this is Trump land. This is just Trump land. What can you say? Okay, I'm going to pick up your phone calls. I'm sorry, I wanted to share that information with you. I kind of used up the whole block there, so I'll pick up your phone calls right after the break. We will continue at the top of the next hour. Dr. Justin Frank will be with us briefly to tell us what he thinks is going to happen if Trump gets indicted. I'm looking forward to his insights, and I'll be picking up your phone calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Mary in Seattle. Hey, Mary, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to make a couple of points. I know we don't have a lot of time. And any rate, I'm wanting people to understand what Valerie just said about the cult and how these people, most of them are good people. They're just under the influence of a cult. And I have to admit, at one time, like 5 years ago, I was in a cult. And the more people would try to tell us the truth and say, it wasn't just me. Some of us were college-educated people with good jobs and homes, and some people had money. And we all believed this man so much that any criticism against him would make us really cling to him more. And it was a religious cult. Mm-hmm. So he decided he wanted us to pray all night. And some people did. They would stay there 7 days a week, and some, prayer might start at 10, and he would let them out sometimes at 1 to 6 in the morning, according to what attacks he felt was coming from other people or the devil. And one woman, she died because she had to be at work at 5 in the morning, and he did this for like 2-3 years. She was the one that was there every night, and she would... it's not in cults all the time. It's not the leader. The people in the cults, you make friends with them. You love
it's a whole
them.
support network, essentially.
Keep you in there sometimes. So she would tell us, like, it was a big blizzard here in Seattle, and nobody showed up, but she did. And she was saying, I'm divorcing my husband because he wants me to stop coming here. What man wants his wife till 3 in the morning praying every night? You got to get up and go to work, and then so dedicated to this man that you are saying you want to divorce your good husband that took very good care of her. And finally, she broke down with pneumonia, because when you abuse your body like that, you can't be healthy. And she died at 40-something because, I believe, of coming there every night, getting up at 5. He never I didn't do it because, I resisted it, but I stayed in it, which is weird that I knew something was wrong and I tried to warn people. Well, a lot of them were against me, but it's going to take prayer for these people in the cult, and it's going to take us reaching out to them instead of, I had to put several people out of my life because of Trump. And one of them was 50-something. She lost her job. And she was homeless, living in a car, and I tried to take her in, and she's just sitting there like she was Christian too. Trump is like Jesus, and they had posters of him with crosses and made up like a saint. And I said, girl, don't you understand? This isn't true. But I had to leave her alone because it was just so weird, and I was wrong. I put several people out of my life because of the election and Trump. And then think about their children. The people that are supporting him are saying, support this guy who may be a criminal, who has this unsavory life, all of these charges, and your children and grandchildren are saying, hey, you're worshiping this guy, and he's doing all this wrong stuff, and he's getting away with it. But do you think your children and your grandchildren are going to get away with criminal behavior? So I asked the Lord for a scripture. And I'm serious. He gave me a scripture that talks about unity, and it said that choose this day what God you're going to serve.
There you
and
go.
Also that there are people that are deceiving people to get them, but you have to focus on God.
There you go. By their fruits they shall be known. Mary, thank you very much for the call. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. It's 51 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Kim in Santa Rosa, California. Hey, Kim, what's on your mind today?
Well, I want to wish you the best with your surgery on Thursday.
Thank you.
And also the thing that just because Trump doesn't like to read doesn't mean he doesn't understand what he's listening to.
Okay.
And he's the one that asked for the original documents. He's the one that took him up to the residency. He knew what he was grabbing.
Mm-hmm. You think so?
So, yeah, I do.
I mean,
believe
we're talking
that.
15, well, actually, I guess it's more like 21 boxes of documents. That's tens of thousands of pages. I mean, how do you even do that?
Well, he was in there for 4 years.
That's true.
He had Stephen Miller helping him and everybody else that he surrounded himself with.
That's
if they
true.
proved not to be loyal, he got rid of them.
Yeah. I'm wondering about Mike Flynn. I tweeted about this a couple of days ago. Mike Flynn was Trump's national security advisor, and it came out, and he also had been Obama's national security advisor, although Obama fired him. And it came out that when he was working in the White House as national security advisor, he was being paid by the government of Turkey, by Erdogan, to be basically a spy for Erdogan. And that's why he got fired. And in fact, that's what he was convicted of, was failing to disclose that he was an agent of a foreign government. So I'm thinking that Mike Flynn might have been the guy who was driving this train. What do you think, Kim?
Well, was he in there long enough to do that?
He was in there, well, that's a good question. I think he was in a little less than a year. I could be wrong. I don't recall, frankly.
It seems like, though, the ones that are the most angriest are the Russians. That's because they haven't gotten their documents yet.
Or they got them a long time ago.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe in Helsinki, Putin gave Trump a laundry list. Said, here you go.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? I think there's a lot of shoes going to drop because Trump didn't pack these things by himself. He didn't take them out to the trucks by himself. He had help. And
he had help, yes.
Somebody's got to be, on the verge of soiling their pants here. I mean, somebody's got to be truly terrified. This is, you're looking at spending the rest of your life in prison if somebody gets nailed for this. So I'm still waiting for the rest of the shoes to drop. Kim, thank you for the call. Excellent points all. Mike in Fresno. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Yes, I want to go back to the Saudi Arabia 9/11.
Yeah.
I just want to state that I had dinner with a petrochemical engineer that he's a U.S. citizen, but he spends 6 months at a time in Saudi Arabia. And he said everybody in Saudi Arabia knows it was the convoys, using women truck drivers going through the port cities that angered the hardcore Muslims and just made them crazier.
Right. It was the American, you mean the American women soldiers?
Yes.
From the Prince Sultan Air Base.
Resupplied.
Right.
Yes. The air base is 10 miles out into the desert. There's only one 6-lane highway that gets you there. So the people aren't going to see people walking around in T-shirts, especially women in T-shirts. But when they loaded up a convoy, went adjacent to Mecca to get to the port city, and went through the port city, that just inflamed the locals.
Wow.
And I told this story 100 times. Very few people believed me. And I had a military officer come up to me, retired, and he says, I was in country, and they did allow military to be out of uniform and in their T-shirts. Wow. So just verifying that they were truck drivers in T-shirts. And this is a country that won't let their women drive vehicles.
Right. Or show their elbows.
Okay. Exactly. And these women
were doing
supposedly
both.
were doing arm gestures out the windows at the locals and just driving them nuts.
Yeah.
The other item is there's a new FBI report on Saudi Arabia, and the crazy part is I don't think this was sponsored by the government. I think this was a religious group that the government is not willing to undertake, or these are the same people that captured the Mecca, and then they cut a deal and said, okay, we get Mecca back, and we cut a deal, but they never.
So you think the Saudi government is being blackmailed or threatened by their own religious fanatics?
The country is predominantly Wahhabist.
Right.
And some of the officers that supposedly were helping the 9/11 hijackers were most likely Wahhabists.
Right.
And they all came into the U.S. on visas.
Right.
And I've never seen the visas. 15 of the visas are Saudi Arabian visas.
Right. Yeah. Well, 15 of them were Saudi citizens. I mean, there wasn't a single Afghan, by the way, in the bunch.
Not a single one.
Right. And
why did we have oil?
Right. Why did we attack Afghanistan? Well, because it was the poorest country second poorest country in the world. Bush knew that he could have a quick war and a little victory, just like Reagan did with Grenada. This was all about the 2004 election. Mike, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
We're reading today from Truth in Our Times by David E. McCraw, Deputy General Counsel of the New York Times, the number 2 lawyer for the New York Times. This is from Chapter 1, titled Election Day. It opens with a tweet from Donald Trump. The failing New York Times has been wrong about me from the very beginning. Sadly, I would lose the primaries. Said I would lose the primaries on the general election. Fake news. November 8, 2016. At 10 p.m., I made one last circuit of the newsroom. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, stood near the political desk, looking on with his wife and a small group of others connected somehow to the Times. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan remained in doubt, but the reality was sinking in. Donald Trump was on the verge of winning the American presidency. I'd been in newsrooms on election nights before. I know how it's supposed to be. The only thing that ever mattered was the horse race, think Gore-Bush, or the historic moment, think Obama-McCain. There was no investment in which candidate was winning. He or she was destined to disappoint in the long run. And the dominant emotion was a certain not quite cynical detachment amid the electric buzz of the vote count and projections and the anticipation of relief that the endless push of the campaign was finally over. Sure, you couldn't ignore the victories or the big picture moments, and the day after stories would be celebratory in their way, duly restrained but with a nod to victory itself, not unlike the next day account of a Super Bowl game or Game 7 of the World Series. Capture the triumph for a night or relish the race too close to call. Leave the dancing and crying for others, for the believers. But this night was like no other election night. There had been an investment, not just journalistic, but spiritual. Donald Trump had campaigned not just against Hillary Clinton, but also against the New York Times and the American press, the mainstream American press. And his astonishing rise to the top of the Republican Party had been built on his near daily attacks on facts, on the very idea that facts matter. For journalists who approach truth like a secular religion and who have seen 1,000 times how a single true story could gut the political career of a lying politician, it had been a year of faith-shaking disbelief. A line had not just been crossed, but obliterated. The shock was palpable as the numbers came in, laced for some with the fading hope for a different outcome among people who generally wanted nothing more than a story worth telling. And there was still a paper to put out, a reckoning to account for. It was too much on an already long night. I slipped away. At the elevators, I ran into Sue Craig and a guy who was obviously not from the Times. Sue had broken one of the biggest stories of the campaign. She was the one who went to her mailbox one day in September and found pages from Donald Trump's tax returns in an envelope. She introduced me to her acquaintance. He had once worked for Trump. I didn't ask why he was there. Like me, Sue had decided to get away. "It's too weird here," she said. We all got on the elevator. Sue, who had written a devastating story about Trump, me, whose letter to Trump's lawyers had lit up the internet for a week in October, and one of Trump's guys. We rode in silence, a strange tableau on the strangest night of the year. 14 hours earlier, as I came into the building, the Times security guard had called me over. They wanted to make sure I knew about the plans for the next morning. In the quirky ways that things happen at the Times, I had become the lawyer to see for all the things that security guys encountered, from the intruder who pilfered women's shoes to the anonymous letter weaponized with razor blades. The Times was printing thousands of extra newspapers, and tables were going to be set up outside for all the people who would be showing up to buy the New York Times for posterity's sake. The headline, I later learned, was going to read, "Madam President." We had been caught flat-footed 8 years earlier when Barack Obama had made history. By the time I arrived for work early in the morning of the 2008 election, the line was already starting to snake down the sidewalk. Soon there were hundreds of Obama supporters who thought, and why wouldn't they, that the place to buy a copy of the New York Times was surely at the New York Times. Lots of things happen at the Times building. Selling newspapers is not one of them. Employees were pressed into emergency duty to cart bundles of newspapers from the Times printing plant in Queens, and the long lines outside the building stretched on into the afternoon. But it was Obama's victory in 2012 that was on my mind this morning. I vote in a neighborhood that is predominantly black and middle class. In 2012, following a drumbeat of stories about how Republicans hoped to suppress voter turnout, I walked into my polling place at a local school 8 minutes after it opened. The line already extended back to the schoolhouse door. "Did y'all sleep here?" a guy wanted to know as he stepped into the foyer. On this morning in 2016, I had arrived before dawn. I was the only one in line at my precinct's table. That all seemed like a strangely distant memory as midnight approached. I had made my escape from the building with Sue and the Trump guy. At home, I sat alone in the glow of the TV screens as the states that mattered fell into place for the Republicans. I turned it off. Donald Trump was about to become president of the United States. The next morning, in a light drizzle on a gray November day, the newspaper sales tables were set up outside the building as planned. No one stopped. The vendors sat idly amid the stacks. There was no Madam President front page. Instead, the headline read, "Trump Triumphs," and the first two paragraphs of the lead story talked about how the vote threatened convulsions throughout the country and made an early mention of those who had watched with alarm the rise of Trump. Nearly half the country had voted for the man. I had just spent a weekend in October back in rural Illinois, in my hometown, and for a moment I allowed myself to see the coverage through the eyes of the rest of America, where, at least for this one night, his victory represented a certain kind of hope that change was going to come at last. Truth in Our Times by David McCraw.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is our friend Dr. Justin A. Frank, M.D., the psychoanalyst, clinical professor at the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Science at George Washington University, the author of numerous on-the-couch books, Trump on the Couch, Obama on the Couch, Bush on the Couch. Justin Frank, M.D. is his Twitter handle, and he's got quite a lively Twitter feed. He's genuinely worth following. Justin Frank, M.D., spelled just like it sounds. Dr. Frank, welcome back to the program. I'm curious your thoughts on kind of two categories of stuff. One is if Trump is indicted, how will he react? And the second is if Trump is indicted, how will his followers react?
Well, as you know already, that which is what I know, is that psychoanalysts can't predict the future any better than anybody else can, although we can have some idea based on our awareness of the past. And if the past is prologue, the prologue is that Trump is a narcissistic psychopath who cannot ever admit guilt or accept criticism. And when he is cornered, he is the kind of person who has written, even if somebody hits him, he'll hit back 10 times harder. So that's what he does. And I think that the question then that you're reacting is talking about is what will Trump do if he's indicted? My first thought is that we might have to do things backwards. And I can't imagine Merrick Garland doing things backwards. But it's like incarcerate first and indict later, almost, because this is a man who, to paraphrase Hillary Clinton, when she said it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to face a psychopath, because we need a whole group of people to confront him. It's the equivalent of doing an intervention for alcoholics, that it requires a whole group of people confronting them. But alcoholics usually have a conscience, which is partly why they drink, whereas Trump doesn't have a conscience. And psychopaths who are narcissistic only can blame others. They're never responsible for anything, and therefore they'll never admit to anything. But in terms of how he would react, he needs to be incarcerated so he can't react in the way that he might react. At least they took away all those top secrets from him, but who knows where they've been already, since they've been in Mar-a-Lago for a long time. But he reacts by being violent and attacking. He reminds me of the stories about coyotes who will gnaw off, if their paw is trapped in a trap, they'll gnaw their leg off, the paw, to be able to escape. I mean, he's that kind of a person. Mm-hmm. So that's the first answer. So he needs to be incarcerated immediately. If you're going to indict him, you have to surround him with a lot of other people, because the only way you can indict him is to be able to immediately put handcuffs on him. It will not work any other way. The second thing, so that's my prediction about that and how he can respond. People who are endangered will respond with violent reactions, period, which is why so many people have been afraid of him all these years. As for his followers, I think his followers have internalized enough of his behavior and his suggestions and his sense of victimhood that they will probably continue to polarize this country, and they need to also be confronted directly. I don't know if they'll be as organized, because Trump really, as chaotic as he is, was really the organizer in a way of the January 6th insurrection attempt. But I think that there are other people who know how to organize things, and and they could do that. So the followers, you can't just cut off the head and the rest of the body's going to die. That's not the case. Trumpism is here. What's happened is there's a long history of feeling attacked, and that you're not allowed to speak up, and that many people have felt that. And what Trump did was, in 2016, he showed what other people took as courage. He said, I don't believe in political correctness. I am going to say what I think, and you can't stop me. So a lot of people saw that as courage. But in my view, it's not courage of his convictions. It's the courage of his psychopathy. And that was his courage. And he was comfortable expressing it. And now we have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and all these members of Congress and various other people who don't have any brakes on what they say. They have the courage of expressing their crazy ideas.
So
and they're dangerous if they get organized.
I understand.
Sorry.
It's brilliant, and I always learn something talking with you. I completely understand your argument that before Trump is indicted, he needs to be locked up so that he can't respond to the indictment in a way that would produce more stochastic terrorism and other problems. But how practically do you do that? Are you suggesting like a psychiatric seizure of him, or are you just speaking in the abstract?
I actually would love to have a psychiatric seizure of him. There has to be a group of people or one person who's willing to have some kind. He has to be forced to do it, but have some direct contact with him, and then call the police and to say that he's a danger to society. And then he has to be locked up. I mean, that's the fact. Wow. I'm happy to be the psychiatrist to do it. If somebody wants to have some armed guards around me, I'm ready to do it.
Okay.
It's really scary.
Yeah, it really is.
He's a scary person.
And
I mean, people used to be afraid of his tweets.
Yeah. Can you speak to stochastic terrorism, this concept that a leader or an influencer, an influential person can essentially say, will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest, and some random person that you never had heard of before steps into the breach and says, I'll do it. In this case, the guy in the Cincinnati FBI field office, or the guy who showed up at the Capitol building yesterday and tried to have a shootout and ultimately committed suicide. To what extent do you think that Trump is intentionally trying to trigger stochastic terrorism, and what kind of a threat does it really represent to our country?
First of all, I think, yes, he's intentionally trying to trigger it. He's been triggering it when he would say lock her up. He's been triggering it when he said, if you beat somebody up in his rallies, I'll pay the bill. He has triggered it from the time he ran for president. Right. So, yes, he's triggering it. Now, the next thing is, how does a person have the power to be able to trigger that kind of terrorism? And I think that it's partly being like a mafia boss, but in this case, it's also that when you're a leader like him, what you do is you can mold people's superegos. You can mold their conscience in such a way as to free them from the chains of having to control themselves in society. You can free them from having to be social and socialized. You can free them from the things that we learned when we were 5 years old, when we learned the Ten Commandments. A president can free them from those built in eventually.
And he's doing that by example, right?
And he does it by example, and then all it takes is one or two people with a gun and with an AR-47 or whatever they have them to do things like that, and it will continue because it is actually a disinhibition of the superego. It's a disinhibition of the conscience. And most people don't do that except when they're watching a boxing match or a, kill the umpire kind of thing. Right. But they're not going to kill the umpire.
Right. No, it's rhetorical. So setting aside for a moment the possibility of actually incarcerating Donald Trump, which, whether it's psychiatrically or legally, I don't think is going to happen any day soon. What, if you were advising President Biden or the media, here we are. I mean, I'm part of the media. What is the message that should be directed to Americans in general and Trump humpers and Trump supporters in particular that might take some of the power out of his rhetoric and his control over them?
It's very hard to convince. It's very hard to present facts to people who are convinced. So it's very hard for anybody to start telling people who love Trump not to love him. It's really hard to do that. And the only way to do that, in my experience, is to do what's called allying yourself with their narcissism. In other words, allying yourself with what they're proud of in themselves and what they feel good about. And only then can you start to present how Trump really hates them and how destructive he is.
For example, we have about a minute to a hard break here. Can you give me a sample dialogue of how that would happen?
Have any of you been to Mar-a-Lago? And how have you been received when you were there? What's it like to have people wait on you and bring you caviar? What's it like to be welcomed into the bosom of our president? You won't be. You can't be. All he wants is to use you and get you to express his rage and hatred. And he's giving you permission and support. But other than that, there's no way you're ever going to go to Mar-a-Lago and ever be invited.
He wants your money, but the only way you're ever going to get into Mar-a-Lago is with a $200,000 check.
Well, that's true. But the other thing he wants is he wants your violence.
Right.
And that's what's harder to accept.
Right. That's.
He wants to get you comfortable being violent.
And then once you're violent, you go to jail and he doesn't.
That's exactly right. He didn't. Actually, I didn't tell you to kill an FBI agent. I just told you where they are and who they are.
Right. Yeah. Which is exactly what he's up to.
Plausible deniability.
There you go.
Great narcissist.
Dr. Justin Frank, one of the great psychoanalysts and psychiatrists of our time. He's a psychoanalyst and clinical professor at the Department of Psychiatry at George Washington University, the author of Trump on the Couch and Obama on the Couch and Bush on the Couch. Justin Frank, MD, is his Twitter handle. Check it out. Dr. Frank, thank you again so much.
Thank you, Tom.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Great talking with you. We'll be right back. It's 18 minutes past the hour. Stick around. And welcome back. Paul in Ambler, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to talk about how we have to, I think, reimagine Donald Trump and what he is now. Shortly after he became president, within a year, Justice Anthony Kennedy resigned. Now, the man wasn't sick. I mean, compare him with Ruth Ginsburg, who was dying of cancer for years. She held on. This guy walks out of office. Well, Anthony Kennedy's son, Justin Kennedy, arranged a $640 million loan from Deutsche Bank to keep the Trump family solvent when no one else would deal with them.
That's right.
You know, not Citibank, not J.P. Morgan. These are New York banks that have known him for decades, known his family for decades, but they won't do business with him.
Yep. So and did you see where, you know, Kennedy was at the White House for Neil Gorsuch's swearing in, and Trump walks up to him, and this was caught on camera. Trump walks up to him and says, "How's your son, Justin?" You know, as if to say, "Nice little son you got there. It'd be a shame if anything happened to him." And within what, a month, Kennedy had resigned?
He resigned, and you know, he's still alive. The guy's 86 years old. He's not sick. Like I said,
he's still giving speeches and stuff. He's doing good.
He writes books. He's fine. Yeah. Now let's look at what Trump very quickly learns to do. President Zelensky of Ukraine. He goes and meets with him personally, and then he tells him, "Oh, you know, I really would like to send you a whole bunch of military material to keep your country from being invaded by the Russians. But if you do something like indict Hunter Biden and find his laptop,
Exactly.
and then bring in
nice little country
Biden.
you got here. Yep.
So what we are dealing with now, Donald Trump is no longer a businessman. He's more like an arms merchant, like a multinational global
He's a mob
arms
boss.
merchant. Exactly, but the mob boss is small compared to somebody who can sell you tanks and helicopters and put in several battalions of mercenaries and turn over a government. That's what's going on in the Ukraine right now. I don't think there's anybody has any misconception about what Donald Trump is. He's not operating on the level of a businessman in markets. He's operating on the level of a global transnational arms merchant, except he deals in information.
Well, and there was that whole scandal
critical
around
information.
There was that whole scandal around Trump giving the Saudis nuclear weapons, how to build nuclear weapons information, and it was never verified that he actually did it, but there were all kinds of reports that he had, that he intended to, that he might.
It's proliferation. I think we've arrived at the point where the national security establishment, the other several hundred billionaires, are looking at him as such a liability that he's counterproductive. Whatever use that they might have been able to glean from him or able to tolerate him is gone.
No, they got their tax break.
After him.
They got their tax break. I think you're right.
One last thing. If you look at the congresswoman from Wyoming, she doesn't just seem brave. She doesn't just seem noble. She seems to be quite certain that she's going to deliver a warrant, a death warrant, to ruin the Trump family.
Yeah, Liz Cheney. Yeah.
What she's going up against a lot. I don't see an ounce of fear or sweat from her at all.
No,
the
I
national
don't either.
security establishment's behind her.
I don't
She's
either.
the tip of the spear.
I'm with you. Paul, I got to run. Thank you. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. A fellow over on Twitter, Paul Ferry, put together an amazing Twitter thread with clips from newspapers starting in 1894. In 1894, the newspaper was saying, nobody wants to work anymore. In 1905, nobody wants to work anymore. In 1916, nobody wants to work anymore. The story is a little more than that, but I'm going through this quickly. 1922, what's the cause of unemployment and hard times? Nobody wants to work anymore. 1937, orchardists complain of shortage of labor because nobody wants to work anymore. 1940, nobody wants to work anymore, says the governor of Wisconsin. 1952, nobody wants to work anymore. 1969, Sunday segment on the TV news titled, Nobody Wants to Work Anymore. 1979, and then, he goes to 1981 and 1999 and 2006 and 2014 and 2022. Yeah, we've been hearing this for a long time. There's a whole video clip about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Past the hour. Welcome back. Geeky Science. This is an amazing story. This from gutnews.com, the Gut News Wire. Scientists say having a bowl of grapes every day could potentially add up to 5 years to your lifespan. Now, this is from research done at Western New England University. They are describing it as astonishing. Now, whether this is the grape seeds or whether it's the grape skins or whether it's the polyphenols that make grape juice red, whether this applies to wine or not, I don't know the answers to any of those questions, but here's what they're saying. Grapes are rich in chemicals that boost gut bacteria, that lower cholesterol. They contain antioxidants that dampen inflammation, that reduce the risk of heart disease and cancer. Grapes actually change the expression of genes, explains Dr. John Pizzuto, professor of pharmaceutics, who has authored over 600 scientific studies. That is truly remarkable, he adds. Mice who were fed a high-fat diet, the same kind of diet typically consumed in Western countries, in other words, mice who are living on fast food, also received a daily powdered grape supplement equivalent to a small container of the fruit, and results showed that the rodents who got the grape powder had less fatty liver disease and lived longer than their peers. In fact, the change observed in the study, this is a quote from the study, the change observed in the study would correspond to an additional 4 to 5 years in the life of a human. Grapes also greatly improve the function of neurons, protecting against Alzheimer's disease, neurons, those cells in your brain. They had positive effects on behavior and cognition that were impaired in mice fed high-fat diets without the extract. In other words, the bad news is the standard American high-fat diet does lead to decrease in brain function. Adding some grapes seems to undo that. A third study shows that in addition to the other qualities, grapes also help burn up calories by increasing metabolism. Recent research also found eating grapes reduces the risk of suffering a heart attack or stroke. Now again, the caveat I would add to this is this may well be true of pretty much any fruit or any of the fruits that are really, really bright in red and orange and yellow colors, the ones that have the polyphenols and other, super healthy nutrients. But hey, eat your fruit and vegetables, I guess is the bottom line. All righty, we'll pick up your phone calls here on the other side of the break on the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the sane among us. Yes, we are still here. We'll be right back. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking the truth to multinational corporations, we'd really rather you didn't know all about. I'll be right back.
Our book for today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of déjà vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump Business Organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump Organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We have come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. There's an absolutely amazing piece of research that was published over at nature.com, the science magazine. It's by Jeannie Erdman and titled How Gut Bacteria Could Boost Cancer Treatments. And it's the story of this guy in Israel, Zion Levy, who went through a new kind of immunotherapy for melanoma. And he went into remission. They then took his gut bacteria and gave his gut bacteria, transplanted it essentially, into other people who had melanoma, and a substantial number of them started going into remission also. This is just an absolutely remarkable, brand new area of science, how our gut bacteria affects our health. We know also that the gut bacteria, affects our moods, even possibly depression. This is a brand new area of science that is absolutely fascinating. I put together a video about this particular article in this area. You can find it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. Picking up your phone calls. And Nona in Reno, Nevada. Hey, Nona, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for all you do for us.
Thank you. What's up?
I've been, we send spaceships to Mars and we have AI and all these incredibly complicated new world things. And the idea of 15 boxes of papers sounds so odd. It just sounds so old-fashioned and sort of not in a world that I would think how our country is being run.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like a setup, like something that the Trump supporters would understand. Like, oh, he took some boxes, and that's no big deal. And but is it actually that there are no copies somewhere? And why wouldn't he have made copies almost immediately? He must have some really intelligent tech heads working for him. He's had some amazing people come to his office and talk to him.
I mean,
why are we?
I have seen reports of him asking people who brought documents into his office to leave and return with the originals. Now, whether that's because he was trying to come up with a treasure trove of things that he could sell to other people, or whether it's just general nuttiness on his part, I just don't know. I don't know, Nona.
I would think that that's what's in the safe. If they want to know, or if we find out that the originals are one thing in boxes, but a nice set of hard drives, little tiny hard drives that could take up an inch square of all that. I mean, look what Edward Snowden took out of America. Yeah. I mean, it just seems crazy to me. I can't wrap my head around 15 boxes of papers. I mean, I have some, stuff in my garage that you're supposed to keep for 7 years because of what I do for a living. And, they're in boxes there. And that's America. That's how we store our information, is in boxes. So I just wondered what about that.
The whole situation is bizarre, and it raises more questions than we have answers for. And and fortunately, I don't think these questions are going to go away. So, stay tuned. Okay. We don't know, but we got to stay tuned to this one. Nona, thank you. Thank you so much for the call. Ken in Woodbridge, Virginia. Hey, Ken, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Professor Hartmann, what a great show, first of all. And second of all, I want to say we all know the man should have been locked up long time ago, and it's only because of his white supremacists. But anyway, the reason why I'm calling is I think you know something about this. Remember the microwave pulse attacks? I think it started in Cuba.
Oh, yeah.
They were on, like, the U.S. embassies, and they started in Cuba, and they started going around in different embassies.
Right, and the whole microwave pulse is still a theory. Nobody's really sure exactly what it is that is getting these people, but it appears to be directed energy of some kind. Yeah.
Well, I believe that the Department of Defense did a study on it or something like that. But they at first they tried to blow these people off and saying no, it's all in your mind. But they've admitted, and now they're starting to treat them. But they never have admitted what that was. And I'm thinking maybe Trump had a little bit to do with transferring some of that technology, where they got this. The U.S. government won't talk about that stuff at all. And, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he, I mean, look, he killed 1 million people without firing a shot with COVID. So you can't put much past the guy.
Yeah, there is that. I mean, he enthusiastically, in fact, tried to drive people back out into the pandemic, knowing that, hundreds of thousands would die, and did die. You're absolutely right. Ken, I don't know. It's this is right now. It's kind of to quote Don Rumsfeld, the known unknowns. We don't know what we don't know. Donna in Flint, Michigan. Hey, Donna, what's on your mind today?
Hello. Glad to be able to speak to you. I'm new kind of ish to the show, free speech, and I really like it.
Thank you. What's up?
I wanted to talk about the documents, and I think people are mistakenly overlooking Melania Trump and her position here. I think that maybe he was taking the documents back to the residents for her to look at them and for her to pick out. I've always thought she was a Russian spy. Nobody talks about her. Nobody pays attention to her. What she could have been doing on January 6th, when nobody knew what she was doing, she could have been directing the documents out to go to Mar-a-Lago. Like I said, nobody would suspect her. everybody thinks about.
She did grow up, and her family grew up during the Soviet times, in Slovenia, and a satellite state. But it always struck me that she was more of just a kind of an old-fashioned gold digger. Pretty girl comes to America and marries a rich guy, rather than anything more bizarre than that. I mean, that it was a marriage of convenience.
Yes, but I think she's smarter than everybody thinks. And I think maybe she might have been even planted there to be with him so that, she could.
Oh, it's possible. I mean, there's allegations that Rupert Murdoch's wife, Wendy Deng, was a Chinese spy.
Right.
So who knows, Melania? I don't know.
I mean, when you think about, like, the gun industry and the spy they had there was a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, Maria Buccini, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, her, Buccini. So it like I said,
I suppose it's possible. My sense of it is that she's probably more focused on raising her son, and the challenges that seem to be associated with that, and
that's the very reason why nobody would even suspect her.
Yeah, could be. I don't know. I'm skeptical that she's the puppet master here. But you never know with these things. You really never know. Donna, thank you for the call. Richard in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. First off, I want to wish you the best of luck with your back surgery.
Thank you.
I've been listening to you a long time. I guess I'm not completely surprised that you're going to be needing additional work on your back, because carrying the load of being the voice of American freedom and democracy is quite a lift.
Well, thank you. This is just a good old-fashioned injury. It started when I was 19, and I injured my back skydiving, and it's just gotten worse over the years. So here we are. But.
Well, that's the best of luck. I hope your medical team. I hope there's nobody wearing a MAGA hat.
Yeah, me too. So what's up, Richard?
Well, a couple things. I'm understanding that there's the major holdup in getting Brittany Griner and Patrick Whelan back from Russia is that the Russians don't want to accept in trade. They don't want to accept Donald Trump.
Yeah,
they prefer to leave him at Gulag-Lago in Florida.
Yeah. One of the things that would not shock me is if Trump were to hop on a 757 and end up in Moscow. It just absolutely would not shock me. Although, the headline over at Raw's Story about 2 hours ago was Trump complaining that they took his passports. So maybe, Mayor Garland is thinking the same way I was.
Sure. It's a straight line through from years and years ago. That's but the one thing the other thing that got me is that Ivana's burial site has had me consumed all weekend on with just the stuff that's floating around on that, and I wonder how many boxes left the White House versus how many were picked up, and whether there's actually stuff inside that. Inside the
right now,
the first hole.
I have heard from on numerous occasions, multiple people have tweeted at me basically, or I've seen in news stories that Ivana was cremated. I have no confirmation of that. I can't say that for a fact. I've just seen it a lot, and yet there were 7 or 8 9 pallbearers carrying a coffin, which apparently had a whole lot of stuff in it. And it's buried on private property where nobody else can dig it up. Is something skeezy going on here? I don't know, but I think it's weird.
I don't think it's skeezy when we're talking about this particular individual in the family. Once again, it seems to be right there on the face of it. So I'm afraid that I'm just completely overwhelmed by conspiracy theories these days, and regarding this family. But anyway. Best of luck in your back surgery, and look forward to hearing Jefferson in your place. Thank
you, Richard. Thank you very much, and I look forward to being back when I'm done. But I'll still be here for the next couple of days. Lord willing and the painkillers hold up. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's your media support group for We the People of the United States of America. Back with your calls right after this. And welcome back. And I just noticed Steve in Jackson, Mississippi. It says you disagree with me, Steve. I'll pick you up on the other side of this break when we're back on with SiriusXM, because you're listening on SiriusXM. So in the meantime, let's see here who has been. There we go. John in Seattle. Hey, John, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, good morning. How are you doing? I wish you luck.
Thank you.
I love your show. Merrick Garland, to me, has a lot of power. And I think it would behoove for him to get on every primetime, get on every television station and every radio station and explain the law about people making telephone calls and threats and what would happen to them if they get caught, which they can when people record people's phone calls, and they would just get picked up, put in jail, but they would also lose their job. They could also have put in their passports that they're a criminal, committed a federal crime, which means other countries cannot accept them. But he needs to explain to the country and to people the threats are the things that can happen to a person who makes a threat. And he has the people to go out and get them. Mm-hmm. And that would be a good way to maybe give a person a second thought about making a threatening phone call.
Yeah, rather than explaining it would be interesting to see an actual prosecution of somebody for one of these threats. We see Eric Swalwell, I don't know if you caught his tweet the other day, where he put one of his threats up on the tweet, and it was just shocking. I mean, it was just, it's... So.
And if he could explain to everyone on a primetime station exactly what the law is, what will happen to a person who makes that phone call, and then if they go, and that they would go to jail, and that they would have, it would be a federal crime.
No, I get it. John, you're repeating yourself.
Just really lay it on the line.
I'm with you. Thank you. Doug in Montrose, Colorado. Hey, Doug, what's up?
Tom, how are you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
I've had the L4 surgery, and it will help you so much. When you wake up, you'll be like another man. But anyways... Thank you.
I'm looking forward to that.
I asked him for Demerol the first night. Anyways, the thing about Trump, I was never political, but when I heard my comedian friends on the comedian channel, they were so mesmerized that he was going to win, Michael Moore and them. And I said, there's no way, because when I was younger in the 70s, I heard him in L.A. On Regis Philbin's show, Good Morning L.A., and he was so smug and...
Trump?
And
Yes.
Yeah. He was just not a good person then, even. He was bragging about his girlfriends and all that kind of thing then. But when I heard he was running for president and watching my comedic channels, I didn't believe that he could really win. And I became political, and I never was. I was, worried occasionally about, our presidents, but this one really...
We all got snookered, Doug. And to a large extent, I think we can thank Mr. Putin for that. It's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back with your calls. share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. Steve in Jackson, Mississippi. Hey, Steve, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. It says here you disagree with me. What's up?
Thank you, Mr. Hartmann. And that's really wasn't what I was calling to say, that I disagree with you. First of all, I really do hope your back surgery goes well. Our daughter always says, yeah, stay ahead of the pain. And if you get prescribed some medication, take it. And that's what she says.
I'm doing it. I'm doing it. I'm following her advice, Steve. So what's on your mind?
Well, look, all right. So I've heard you before, and I know you're a very, very fair person. And the reason I'm calling is I never hear discussed on these programs about the fake Russian dossier that Hillary Clinton paid for, that was used for 3 years to try and unseat Donald Trump. And I never hear it discussed. I would like to lay out a couple of facts and then just get your comment, if I may.
Yeah, go for it. You're talking about the Steele dossier here, the one that Marco Rubio's campaign originally commissioned, and then when Rubio dropped out of the campaign, the Clinton campaign picked up. That's the one you're talking about, right?
That's the one.
Yeah. Okay, go.
All right. The truth is Hillary paid money through a law firm to Christopher Steele. He then obtained Russian disinformation, which was all fake, that President Trump was colluding with Russia.
Well, there was actually a number of there were several dozen points that were made in the Steele dossier, and many of them turned out to be absolutely true. There's a number of them that were not substantiated. The main one that was not substantiated was that Trump had a couple of hookers peeing on a bed that Obama had slept in. But there were a number of things in the Steele dossier that have been substantiated, Steve. I'm sure you know that if you've looked at it.
I did look at it, and what was substantiated, there was no collusion with Trump and Russia. And I
to do what?
I mean, to get unduly elected. Well, and that was the whole point of what Hillary. Well, let me just finish, then I want you to comment. So that was the whole point. So for 3 years, I watched CNN, MSNBC, all saying the walls were closing in on President Trump, that he was colluding. That was determined by the special prosecutor that was false. And that went on for 3 years, and that was immediately when Trump took office. Why did Hillary do that, and why do you give her a pass?
Well, first of all, Hillary picked up that investigation because it was what's called opposition research. Every candidate does that. That's why Marco Rubio hired it in the first place. Because Marco Rubio wanted to take down Trump, and because Hillary Clinton wanted to take down Trump, obviously. But that said, the Mueller report.
Fake information.
The Mueller report.
Fake information.
The Mueller report found 10 specific examples of Donald Trump committing the felony crime of obstruction of justice. Now, Bill Barr decided not to prosecute any of those.
That's a different subject. Nice try.
No, most of those were based on the Steele dossier.
Nice try. I'm talking collusion with Russia. No, there was none.
Like when Don Jr. sat in the office there in Trump Tower and said, "Yeah, we would love to get some help." Or when Donald Trump said, "Russia, if you're listening, can you get Hillary's emails?" And the next day, Russian intelligence hacks the DNC. How is that not collusion?
It was a joke.
That was not a joke.
It's a joke. Yes, it was. All right. Well, since
that was asking a foreign power for help. That's what he did, and he got that help.
All right. No, he did not.
He certainly did. They hacked the DNC and they released the information through Julian Assange. That's not even in dispute, Steve.
Did the FBI, and we're talking about FBI now with Trump, did the FBI use the fake dossier to obtain FISA warrants? Yes or no?
I have no idea.
Yes, they did. They used They used the fake dossier. They attached it to their affidavit.
First of all, again, I'll say this again, Steve, and you know this is true. There were things in the Steele dossier that were true about Donald Trump,
Such as?
about Donald Trump's association with oligarchs, about Donald Trump's association with the Miss Teen stuff, about Donald Trump's association with Oleg Deripaska. There was a bunch of stuff in there that was absolutely true.
It's not illegal and not collusion.
All right. Well, Steve.
But the point is,
Steve, why does this matter?
Because the FBI started right then and right there using circular reporting, and you ought to know that. They use circular reporting. They would report to, like, the New York Times that there's this dossier. Then the New York Times would report that the FBI has a dossier. So that's who they use. That's how they cited a source.
Well, maybe in right-wing world. I mean, I don't know that the FBI was leaking that information in the New York Times.
That's been discovered. They were using circular reporting.
I would be astonished if the Hillary Clinton campaign wasn't leaking it to the New York Times. Steve, we're out of time. I'm sorry, but thanks for the conversation. I confess I am not an expert on the Steele dossier, but apparently you are. Anyway, poor Donald Trump, right? He's always the victim, the poor guy. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. We'll continue our conversation. My apologies to those of you still on hold. If it's anything goes August, like I said, give us a shout tomorrow. We'll continue these conversations. In the meantime, get out there, get active, tag You're It. We all need to be participating in this democracy. And as the Republicans are aggressively purging people off voting rolls right now, double check your voter registration. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.